And we'll take a look at some worker models. All right, so we'll start with worker models. I'm just in the add-on test TMO. And if there's any questions or anybody raises your hand, don't raise your hand, just come ask the question because I'm not paying attention to that screen. Ask the question, interrupt me, ask any questions that you see fit through the duration. Okay, so I'm going to go into the add-on test company here. I've chose to take a peek at Aldi. So I'm going to in PSD tool, which again, for those of you are my UK friends that are on with us as well, PSD tool is the professional services developer, one of the two, web tool, and it's ultimately the pulse of the True Commerce network. This is where we see all of our customers and our trading partners interacting on our network, or what we refer to as tc.net. So I went to the relationship of the test, the add-on implementations team has their own test TML. So I jumped in there to take a peek. Mid-market doesn't have one, do they?
I don't believe so.
We should get one. Mid-market test company. You guys should have one. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and jump down to Aldi. And I'm going to take a look at the worker models within Aldi. Okay, so what is a worker model? Let's start there. So a worker model is a small piece of change or configuration at the customer and trading partner level where we can manipulate data inbound or outbound to a trading partner. Every customer relationship between a customer and their trading partner will have a relationship that looks very similar to this. If you clicked on Ace Hardware, you would see, again, every relationship has a worker model configuration. So within these worker models, if we click the plus sign and we open up these worker models, we're going to be looking at the paths and the direction of the data. So what's a path? A path is just as simple as a path that is out in your yard where you lay bricks to walk down to the outside of your backyard, right? Follow the path to where the direction of the data is going to go, or where you would go if you were walking in your backyard. So you see you've got your little person up here as the test company, and you've got your little blue person down here as the trading partner. Your arrows are going to be the direction of the path, or where the data is going to go. And the direction here you can see from Aldi is pointing upwards. It would be the direction would go this way, coming back to the customer, okay? So I always get into the habit of looking at the relationship here, as opposed to, you can also look at the relationship by going to Aldi and looking from that relationship. But you're going to see that the relationship, the arrows are going to be different, right? Because you're looking at this in a different direction. So in our test company for add-on, you'll see now I'm looking on the direction of the partner side. The trading partner is at the top, and the customer is down here. So I like to look at the direction here of where the customer is sending, and the trading partner is sending this direction. So the paths of your data will be hard-coded or defaulted depending on the trading partner relationship that you purchase. So you say, how do you get this data in here? It's already going to exist for you. And there are base default templates that are out there, or default paths that every time this trading partner, Aldi, is sold, they automatically get these defaulted paths that are built out by our trading partner services team. And every default is going to look a little bit different. And you're going to see the default paths on the trading partner record as opposed to the customer record, of course. So here, let's look at the defaults of what's going on with the data. We know that Transaction Manager lives in the cloud, but the data sits on a customer's computer until they actually hit send. So customer has an 856 sitting in their outbox in Transaction Manager. and then they hit send. As soon as they hit send, that data starts working its way down through the worker models with the direction of the path. So first it's going to hit, and again, I won't even pretend to know say that I know all of this again. So just bear with me. The HCT piece, and not that I don't know all of it, but I don't know the exact details of every little nook and cranny through this. So, but what happens is the data hits our network and it runs through our HTTP. By default, that's usually set as always run, and we leave that be. Never notice when you look at the data in TMO before you send it, it has all those weird TC ampersand, TC pound, those weird tokens, TC hashtag, right? All of those weird data points that are stripped on the network once the transaction leaves the customer's TMO. So we want that data to set the delimiters, and the delimiters are the pieces of the special characters that sit in between each data point. So by default, they're usually the delimiter for the end of the line is usually a tilde. And then you've got your asterisk, and then your greater than here as your sub element, right? So the element delimiter we're used to seeing is BEG03 asterisk, and then a value, and then an asterisk, right? This separates each individual element within a segment. So TM, the network will set the delimiters. And it looks like there's a carbon copy in here. So you can see that there is a carbon copy that is in here. This was added. And if you can probably see, this looks like this was added back in June of 2019 with Jody, who's no longer here at TC. But this, what happened with the data here is the data would get carbon copied. This is saying this is a test, and run if the sender ID token is test. We know this isn't correct, right? We know that this is just somebody did a test in here to see if this worked. Then you can come into the next worker model, and you can see that the next thing that the data does with in front of this little gear, Kristen was probably testing around in here too. Test and test. Those aren't right, obviously. But then the data is going to run through our AS2, where the customer is usually going to get billed. We can turn this off when we're loading raw data so that we don't kick off a customer's billing. We would just simply do never run, save, and then deploy it out. And then our send to billing worker model, the send AS2 would actually run through our AS2 certificate on tc.net, and we could actually turn this off if we didn't want a 997 to go back to the partner. If we wanted to load data, we could do never run, and then we also could come to our send to billing and choose that to never run. So you can see within here, you're going to see type, and this is going to be your condition. When do you want it to run? Run when it's this. Do not run if it's that. Always run or never run. Now let's look at the direction of Aldi coming back into the customer. This is where we receive our AS2 from the partner. tc.net is going to always run and set those delimiters. Then we're going to send to the client interface, which is simply TMO, and then send to billing. So the customer will be charged kilocharacters when they receive data and also when they send data. So that's the basic path and flow within a worker model. You can click plus sign to open these up and minus to delete, to collapse them. Some notes up here. If you add, say you wanted to add a worker model to do a new configuration, by default, it would add that configuration to the bottom of the list. And then you simply would reorder that worker model or that configuration to move that up in the chain of wherever you would need to have that particular worker model performance action before the data came to tc.net. And then we also can deploy our relationship up here after we make an update. So let's try to go ahead and let's add a worker model. Let's see what kind of options we have. Let's say it's from the customer and we want to do a change ID from test TMO to the trading partner, and we can click continue. All right, so it's going to pull up that worker model for us. And then we start talking about tokens. This is where we start getting into using Spawn 3.0, which is our definition of our X12 data or our maps from our partners. So if we want to change an ID from the customer or to the trading partner, we would have to fill in the particular values or the tokens required to suffice this need or this want that we have here, right? We can see that there's some hard-coded tokens in here already. And all the tokens really are doing for you is giving you a number for a particular field on an EDI map. So we'll go to Spawn 3.0. We'll go to File. We'll go to Open Plugin. And if you don't have Spawn 3.0 downloaded, feel free to reach out to a senior resource on your team or myself, of course, and I can help you run through that install should you see fit. So I come to my filter and I go to Aldi and I go ahead and open up my map. And by default, it's going to put all of my maps up here in the upper right-hand corner. My incoming maps and my outgoing maps, and of course, my static 997. So if this customer is sending an invoice, we double click one of these, it will load the plugin info here. And by default, you'll see that the show token IDs are unchecked. If you check that, select that token, each line then gives you an available number or a token. That's all we refer to is when we talk about tokens, we talk about the number that is associated to the EDI field on the document. So we see token, it says ISA sender ID token is 10005. If I come down here and I go to search and I search 10005 and I click on find, shows me this right here. The token for the sender ID, the ISA sender ID is 1005. And that's indeed the token that is sitting here. You're going to have defaulted values depending on the particular change ID that you want to put into place. I'm just going to jump out of that, just jump out of there and not save that, but either way. So the tokens that we are looking at within the map, as I said before, are simply for, so a line number is the IT 101 on the 810 invoice. The token is 3076. So I would expect on the 850 PO for line number to also be 3076. So when we're using turnaround, for those of you that work in a non-integrated fashion, when you take an inbound transaction and create an outbound transaction, when you say, oh, there's a line number on the PO, but it's not turning around to the invoice, well, it's because the token numbers probably don't match, right? So just because we call it item underscore assigned underscore ID, the token, the actual number of the field needs to match. And I would expect it to match for the outbound, just as I would be the inbound. Okay, perfect. So some other add worker model features here we've got. Let's say we were choosing, we'll just try a change ID again. I want you to see what it looks like. So we'll say that the new receiver ID needs to be this. We'll go ahead and save that. And then once I save, right, you're always going to see a needs deployed. Needs deployed means that you did something, you made an update and it hasn't been pushed out to the customer yet. But the first thing I need to do is reorder this worker model because this change ID is going to happen after the customer has already sent the data, and that won't do us any good. So if I hover over my little recycling can up here, I can move my change IDs, and I'd probably drop that and put that above my carbon copy and then save my reorder, because again, the way the data is going to hit the network and run through the path of the data, you need to change the ID first before you do anything else. So logical order of operation would be where you would want to drop and kind of reorder your worker model before you deploy it. And then I'll deploy. I'll have to choose a reason. Just saying testing purposes, and I click save. Once I save here, this will deploy out to the customer. All right, that's very basic worker model configuration, adding, deploying. Again, you're going to do this at the relationship level for each trading partner or customer so that you only affect that relationship and no other relationship. Anybody have any other tidbits or thoughts of the trade they want to add before we move on a little bit more to Spawn? Okay, no problem there. Okay, let's go ahead and jump back into Spawn. And let's go ahead and take a look at Spawn 3.0 and what the definitions of our maps look like, right? So to get to Spawn, ultimately the trading partner provides us, True Commerce, mapping specifications. Then our mapping team interprets and builds and pushes out for use. When they push them out for use, and the definitions of what they've interpreted are going to be here. And again, I say interpretation because, as we know, mapping specifications are up for interpretation, depending on if it's marked as mandatory, not required, conditionally mandatory, right? Our mapping team does the very best they can in interpreting as the trading partner would expect us to interpret them, but sometimes we do indeed have to come back and make some changes. But this is where the definition of what's currently going on with the maps is where this lives. So we've got an 850 here, right? We know, for those of us that are proficient with reading EDI, we know BEG 01, 02, and 03, right? These are for inbound transaction. Let's go ahead and look at an outbound transaction. A couple columns, a couple things to keep to note here, right? This column here under M means mandatory. So if there's a checkbox there, that means that particular field is mandatory and the customer has to send data in it. The customer does not send data in that particular field, it will flag you with a red X and you'll be unable to send. Such as buyer's item number is mandatory and description is mandatory, and so on. This column here is going to be your segment position of the map. This is your IT 101, IT 107, etc. This is the title of the field in TM. This is what the customer would see. And then qualifiers are hard-coded data points that never change, that will always live in the field in front of the field that you're typing in your data. So when a customer enters the buyer's item number as 12345, in the IT106 position, you're going to have a hard-coded IN. While batch number is not required, if a customer enters a data point in batch number field, that data point will reside in the IT109. In the IT108 will be your hard-coded qualifier of B8. Let's come down to a field that has a list value. A list value is a drop-down set of choices that the customer can choose from, right? They would never have a drop down for description, would they? Right? Description is large, small, medium, extra large, whatever it may be. That's usually not a list value. Quantity is usually just something that's manually put in. But look at UOM. We have values in that particular field that the customer can choose from. Okay, so not only is it required, there is a list value. Okay, so how do we get into those list values to check them out? Scroll down here on the right-hand side, and when I didn't say this earlier, and I apologize, you can pull this screen up, you can pull this screen down, you can pull this to the left, whatever makes more sense for you for visibility. I like to pull this one up just as long as I can see this info up here. So if I come down here to list values, so I'm here, come down here to list values, and I click in that field. I click the 3 ellipses to the right down here. It pulls up my available options. So if a customer chooses chooses carton as the dropdown, they will send CT in the IT103. If a customer chooses pounds net on the dropdown, they will send PN to the trading partner in the IT103. So what if there's one there that, what if we need to send each, and the trading partner allows us to send each, right? Then we just create a case for trading partner services and say add each. And the value that we're going to send where it says qualifier, the value we're going to send to the partner is going to be EA, because we know that that's standard for X12. If you come down to quantity ordered at retail UOM, CTP05, you can see this field is required, and there is also list values available. Click in the list values option in the bottom right. Click your 3 ellipses. The customer says case, sends case from the drop down, they'll get CA. The partner will receive CA. Now, by default, you're going to be on this segment table up here, this view. If you jump to the dynamic form, just a different view, you'll see that this view actually shows what the customer would see in their TM. But as funny as it is, and I don't know why, the view that you see here when we are in the 810, we're on the segment table here. If we come to the dynamic form, it's going to kick us out into old TMO. This is what the old desktop version of TM looked like. So you're like, okay, fantastic. Makes a little more sense, right? If a customer has, sorry, let me scroll back up. Type. See, there is these options over here. Commercial invoice, corrected, or a credit memo. This is what the customer would see on the main tab. Commercial invoice, corrected, or credit memo. And if we went to our items section and went to buyer's item number here, you don't see that IN because that IN is your hard-coded data point. But if you come to buyer's item number, you can see indeed that this is required. And again, I know the tabs look different than they look in TMO, but those of you that have seen TMD or Transaction Manager Desktop, you know that this is exactly what it looks like. So it's just a different view. And then if I come back to my regular segment table and I click on this third icon, this is the printing information. This is what the view would look like if your customer attempted to print an 846 to a PDF or print an 810 to their PDF. It would look like this, again, without the @ and the underscores. This is just where we're pulling from the item name, right? Very similar to how we pull the token. And then I don't touch the global calculations or the global conditions, I can tell you that. Those have to do with calculations that are done in the map. For example, totaling up quantities, totaling up prices, and so on. And then the conditions are, for example, this could be conditionally mandatory. If buyer's item number is sent, you do not need to send batch number. But if you send batch number, then you don't need to send buyer's item number. So again, like I said, folks, I didn't think this was going to take much of an hour. Just wanted to give a quick overview for those that have not seen Spawn and don't know much about worker models for us to kind of chat about today. Other than that, I don't have much for you. Let's go ahead and open up to questions or comments for anybody. Anything is welcome.
Hey, Jerry.
Hi, Sherry.
Hi. So is this per that partner, per that customer? It's not, it doesn't affect that globally, or does it?
What does what affect it globally?
So this is the maps per like an 856
Yes.
or whatever for
Yep.
that partner, for that customer. So are we, when we're in here, is this a global for just the partner for every customer?
Yes, so you would have the option. So here, so for Aldi specifically, if a customer owned the relationship with Aldi, they would have the ability to receive an 850 or an 860, and they would have the ability to send any four of these different invoices, and of course the 997.
So a customer could have, so John, the customer, and Sam, the customer, they both have Aldi. So the maps could be different per customer then.
Well, they're only different when there's justification for mapping to make a new transaction, right? Because I can tell you, when we first started with Aldi, we only started with purchase order and invoice. Some customer that owns Gentran said to mapping, hey, mapping, I need a specific invoice to make my integration work for Gentran. So mapping said, okay, that's justifiable. I'll go make it for that customer. Then I bet you somebody in integration said, hey, I need a new map. Dear mapping, I need a new map because my looping structure isn't correct. So I need you to create me one where I can import it.
So hence all of our templates that are in Foundry under each partner.
Correct. Correct. You got it. And once one customer, what happened with this one here? I bet you 99% confidence saying that this customer, whatever customer chose to have this one invoice with expanded decimals, they didn't call it that. Our mapping team called it that. And when we push it out for that customer to use, everybody else that owns that plugin is also capable of using that particular map.
So if we were to want to see what was a standard template for a document for a partner, we'd probably want to look at the first line and we'd want to choose, probably the 810 invoice period when we start testing.
Yeah, and don't necessarily think of it as the first one in the list. Just use the least cumbersome of the naming conventions.
Okay.
Stay away from invoice, no pack, ASN import, right? Stay away from ones that don't make sense.
Yeah,
if you don't know what Gentran is, don't touch it, right? Yeah. Chances are you would probably use this one, but then also this invoice import might do something a little bit different too. So, but yes, you want to stick with the least cumbersome of the naming conventions when you first pick a transaction to use if there's multiple options.
Usually, so whenever I see that import on a document, that doesn't mean that it comes from overseas. That actually means import from their ERP.
Correct. Usually what the import means on a document is there's some sort of auto calculation that's being done by the maps that's turned off. Because I know certain customers only want to import the data directly from their ERP without having our maps do any of the calculations.
Okay, so we, for me, for example, this is just a view. I can't edit it or anything else, like making something mandatory, like for example.
That's just mapping case.
You got it.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you want overall the global map to be changed, right? All customers of TrueCommerce always have to send UOM. Go ahead and put in a mapping case. If not, just mark it as required for your customer in their TMO.
Okay. So this just, it's a look inside, seeing what it needs to be done as far as, when I do a mapping case and I say, don't make, this mandatory. This is where they actually do it.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And being specific with the exact transaction you want them. So if you went in, for example, this opens up to a great question. Thank you, Sherry. And Mark too, for that input, for an invoice, right? You don't just, if you go create a case for mapping to make an update to the invoice for Target, they're going to say which one, right? So always being specific. My customer is using invoice custom turnaround. Make the update to this map and this map only.
I did a case a while back. I can't remember who the partner was or the customer, but in the drop down, where you have to go and select what template to update, it wasn't available, but it was available for the customer. How would that be?
It's just the way mapping has things configured, to be honest. They're not always there. I'll pull up an example. You don't need it. You just have, if it's not there and available, just type it in the block that says using this, right? I'll show you here in just a second.
Yeah, because I was doing the mapping and I told them in the notes, well, I would have selected this in the drop down, but this is the name of the document, but I can't find it.
Right. Say we were using Target and we were pushing it to mapping.
And then go down to your mapping tab below. Down at the blue bar. And it wasn't found in there.
Yeah, very common. Mapping needs to put them there manually. If it's not there, just choose one. So say I need an ASN called Pick and Pack Jerry. Let's just say that's the name of the ASN, and I don't see it here, right? I don't see it. When I do my communication transactions, 856 Pick and Pack Jerry, right? I would say could not Jerry Pick and Pack.
And it makes you choose it. So I just selected all the 856s.
Just choose one. Yeah, just choose one just to select something. And then be cognizant when you're writing out your example here. That you want it only updated to that map. Great question, Sherry.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Anything else? Comments, questions? All right, everybody, going once, going twice. All right, cool. Hopefully everybody learned a little something new today. As Shulak said in the chat,